Professor Wallace, could you summarize for us why does authoritarian government needs number to quantify their ruling?
Yes, so I think in the Chinese case, coming out of the Cultural Revolution and Mao's death, the Chinese leadership needed to offer something different. And so the leadership under Deng Xiaoping focused on using production numbers, kind of without looking too closely at how local officials got there, i.e. using capitalistic methods at a time when communism was very important. Overall, the Chinese government kind of transformed from an ideological movement under Mao into a more pragmatic growth-promoting machine by limiting its vision to just a few numbers, which promoted kind of like produced excellent performance on those numbers, but over time, kind of negative externalities elsewhere kind of like grew and grew, like pollution, corruption, and debt. And so I think those became too important to ignore or paper over.
Could we assume that a lot of the major numbers that the CCP released were cooked in the CCP history?
I think that's an interesting question. I think the major way in which numbers are manipulated is not kind of grossly kind of saying that there's a skyscraper outside my window when it's just a field, something kind of totally Potemkin, totally fake, that those phenomena existed. So the Great Leap Forward is the classic example of an idea where kind of crop numbers were purported to be rocketing towards the sky, but in fact, people were starving. The numbers that I mostly talk about in this book are manipulated in a more subtle way, kind of officials saying that growth grew, or GDP growth in my province was 10% this year instead of 9%, something like that, where there is real manipulation, but it's not completely disconnected from reality.
Before Xi Jinping came into power, what are the most interesting numbers CCP cooked? Could you give us a few examples?
That's a very good question. The one that I started with coming into this project was this gross domestic product, or GDP. And it's this number that we use when we talk about China's economic development and when local officials are judged for promotions or other things, that it's the general way that we talk about the size of an economy. And again, the number is mostly accurate for the most part, especially at the national level, but local level officials at different moments in time, especially when they were about to kind of like leave their jobs or get a new job, would increase their numbers kind of like up a little bit more than we might expect. So a little bit more than reality. A couple of other examples, you can think about the political pressures for local government officials on the one-child policy, which of course is numeric from the beginning, right? How many children? One child, right? So that pushed towards a lot of kind of like human rights abuses, and also as families decided to try to hide from that policy, the number of births in the country became a little bit inaccurate. And then finally, another example that I talk about in the book is industrial accidents. So at one point in time in the mid-2000s, the industrial accidents became so pervasive, it became a political problem. And so the center kind of put a notice on all local government officials that industrial accidents above a certain amount would be punished. And so what you see is kind of twofold, and it reflects the general tendency that I talk about, that this emphasis on numbers produced kind of good outcomes. In general, industrial accidents did decrease, but you also see real kind of like perversion of those numbers, that there is a real disconnect between reality, that it looks like a bell curve, but it gets cut off right at that moment where the punishment is enacted. And so that looks like telltale signs of manipulation.
CCP used to measure local officials' performance by three numbers: GDP, fiscal revenue, and the investment that his district could attract. Has this helped fueling China's economic growth from Deng Xiaoping and Jiang Zemin era to Hu Jintao era?
In the book, I refer to this as the system of limited quantified vision, that the central government really focused on these few statistics, and that these few statistics were very connected to overall economic development and improving the economic fortunes of those localities, if not necessarily the people inside of them. It represented a real increase in economic activity. I think it is one of the reasons why they were able to get local officials to participate in the system. What these numbers and the focus on just these numbers kind of did not look at are issues like corruption. So you would be interested as a local official in kind of building a new factory or building a new residential development because you could give the contract to a friend and they would maybe give you a kickback or something along those lines. That would help the numbers and maybe overall would help the country's numbers, but you would also get something on the side. So the limited nature of this vision from the center helped release local officials and allowed them to line their own pockets, but over time, this kind of corruption problem, as well as issues like pollution or debt, became increasingly difficult to ignore. And so even under Hu Jintao and Jiabao, they tried to do a little bit more to try to expand the number of statistics that local government officials would be judged by in the cadre evaluation system. But it was not that successful in terms of changing behavior. It took more kind of political change at the top under Xi Jinping to really change this local behavior.
After Xi Jinping changed this local behavior, does it also produce new problems? For example, officials might try to cook new numbers.
I think there's a couple of different ways to think about it. One is that if the center is looking so closely at what you're doing, or you're concerned that anything that happens might be seen as corruption, that you might not do anything. And so I think one of the issues that under centralization under Xi Jinping, you might a lot of local officials have frozen. They don't do anything, which is not ideal either. Right? Obviously, corruption is a problem, but you also want to promote economic activity. You want to produce development as best you can. And I think this like very tight leash or very kind of close monitoring of local behavior has made things difficult. And so sometimes deals that should have happened are not happening. At the same time, a lot of the new efforts that have been put forward on local officials are not really about performance in economic terms, but in performance in political terms, like following Xi Jinping thought or following central dictates, whatever they may be, in ways that party building, what have you, that don't necessarily improve the lives of the people under their jurisdiction. And so I think that those numbers are really hard to find something objective to measure party building. It's kind of given a lot more space for higher level officials to promote their friends or kind of those inside of their networks.
From the quantification point of view from your book, where is China under Xi Jinping heading? It's
an open question. I don't think that I know. So for instance, under the Liang Hui that just happened, the two sessions, there was a new GDP target that was announced of around 5%. And this number was seen as relatively low. But I think even this number will be difficult to reach because of the problems in the real estate sector and in other parts of the economy. And so I wonder to what extent this number will become important and that there will be stimulus or other types of policies in order to make sure that this number is hit, or if this number will not be so important and instead themes like common prosperity or other priorities will make the GDP number of itself kind of less significant. My reading of what happened these past few weeks has been really split, that there are some indications that kind of GDP growth and kind of promotion of the private sector is something that the economy under Li Qiang is really interested in. But I think there's also been a renewed emphasis on kind of the state control and state organization, party control, really, over economic activity in ways that suggest that perhaps the era of development focus and GDP is over.